I've come to the conclusion that we can no longer live today as we have lived in previous centuries. We have created educated people, and some of these educated people, at least, now have different expectations. They're not satisfied just to get a job and sit in front of a computer or a desk for the whole of their lives. And they have got minds which wish to discover. And the other great change, which makes me say that we now have a different kind of human being, is that our population has so exploded that every time the population has exploded throughout history, we have invented new kinds of work in order to absorb the new population. We invented industry, we invented the service society, we invented public service, and now there are 1 billion young people for whom we have to find jobs. And many of these are educated, and you cannot expect them to work for the kind of institutions which exist and which were established at least a century ago. And so we have to invent new kinds of jobs, and this is what makes this century exciting. We have to, therefore, reinvent a new idea of business, a new idea of work, because work is where we spend most of our time. Just to earn a living by working in order to amuse oneself is what the 20th century invented. I see our goal now as to not to start a revolution. We must engage in experiments. The pharmaceutical industry is constantly engaging in experiments to find cures for medical problems. Most of those experiments are unsuccessful, but they realize they have to spend money on it. And what I want to do in the future of work is to persuade big organizations to have side by side a unit which is allowed to experiment and do things differently. To have as the goal the development of the curiosity and the satisfaction of giving people an interesting life. The purpose of life is to produce life, and that is what most people start by doing. They have children and they look after their children. But they spend only a certain portion of, an increasingly small portion of their time bearing children. And so what should they do if we're going to live 100 years? We never think of business as being buying and selling of time, which of course busyness, that's what it means. How should we spend 100 years? In order to do that, we've got to have a different idea of how we should think about the past and how we should think about the present. And you know how Einstein said that time is an illusion, past, present, future is an illusion. We are sitting here, and I look at you, and you are not just living in the present. Each one of you has got a mind which is filled, which is like an antique shop, which has got ideas coming from many centuries, ideas which you have picked up in the course of your life. And you are therefore a mixture of the past, present, and with one of the great, very recent discoveries of neuroscience is that in order to be able to think about the future, you need to be aware that ideas about the future are formed in exactly the same place in the brain as your memory. And if you have no memory, you cannot think about the future. So in order to be able to imagine a world which would satisfy us better, you've got to have a larger memory. In the 20th century, we were taught that what matters most is the way you were treated in your infancy, and your memory is focused on your childhood, your infancy, and you think of yourself as being determined by that. We need to expand our memories and to discover the memories of others and to become aware of all the memories of the whole of human experience. Without history, you're aware only of the present. You're a modern person. A modern person says, we've got to do better than the past, forget the past, we've got to create something new. But you cannot create something new if you don't know what has happened before, and you don't know the stupid mistakes and the failures and why things went wrong. I'm putting aside politics, which is concerned with power, and economics, which is concerned with property, and I am focusing on what goes on inside people's heads. My ambition, therefore, for this century is that we should discover who inhabits the world. We don't know who we are. I hear my sitting in front of you, and this is ridiculous. I don't know who you are. How can I talk to you? And that is why I see, as the alternative to government decrees and laws, and to general principles, and the idea of class opinions dominating life. I see the interaction between people as being now the crucial motor of change. And that is why I look at private life. Because in private life, one can really discover, one can really be honest, one can really get to know someone really, really well. How can we work at that and develop that? Take each of the problems with which we are faced and see how historical experience of all civilizations can modify the way we behave and our ambitions, fighting over promotion and trying to get more money and so on. These are all things which will continue to exist. But what can we do on the side to get round this? And I found a Chinese man whom nobody has heard of, who was quite successful, and he wrote plays and so on, and he was a civil servant, and he had a decent job. But at the end of it, he said, I've wasted my life. And then, you see, by relating his experience to the experience of other people whom he didn't know in other periods of history, all the other people who think they have wasted their life, then you can think, what is a wasted life? And a wasted life is one based on ignorance of what other people are doing. What characterizes us now is not only our education and our number, but also our isolation. I don't know who you are. You don't know most of the world. You've never met most of the world. I therefore organize conversations between people who don't know each other. And I'm amazed by how keen people are to know each other and how hungry they are. Not only hungry for food, not only hungry for money, but hungry for conversation and for understanding of other people. And that is what governments cannot do. Governments can tell you, how much income tax you're going to pay. But when you get a letter from income tax, it is never signed by a person. It is just income tax. So you don't see the world. You're living in cloud cuckoo land. So how can you get rid of the illusions you have about yourself? The current view, which we've developed for a long time, is you've got to know yourself. I think that's impossible. You can have illusions about yourself. The only way you know yourself is in part by discovering what other people think of you, and then you see, well, you're not what you appear to be, and people in some way can stimulate you to think harder about yourself. But instead of saying know yourself, know other people. And that is what, for me, the purpose of life is. Mozart said, the purpose of life is death, which means that we've all got to prepare ourselves for a better life, an afterlife. Each of you have your own ideas about what the purpose of life may be, but for me, the purpose of life is to discover what life is. I want to know who inhabits the world. I want to understand what it means to be human, what are the possibilities, and also the end of it. I want to see what I can give to the world which it hasn't got. And I can only discover what it hasn't got if I talk to everybody and see what is missing. And I've got to give a present at the end of it to thank people for tolerating my presence in this world. This is, to me, the inevitable consequence of the fact that I've been through an education which has made me think that everything is interesting. I encourage people to create self-portraits of themselves. Tell me what you think you are. What is fascinating is the way that some people say, well, I'm not interesting. Nobody cares about me. But they are interesting, and you can show that they're interesting. And I remember doing this with children, adolescents, in one of the worst schools of Oxford where people are trained to become labourers. And they said, this is the first time anybody has asked our opinion. They were scared to talk about themselves because they thought they'd be laughed at. But when they did, they were amazed that, yes, there's something in them. And it's curiosity which makes this possible. I'm interested in the power of curiosity and what we can do by getting to know each other. The idea of the couple. At the moment, we are concerned with finding a partner with whom we can live and who understands us. That doesn't always work very well, and half of marriages end in divorce. And people still feel that they cannot find the person who's absolutely right for them. Well, I'm interested in developing the idea of the couple to the mind. That is to say, not people with whom you are sexually attracted or whatever, but people who stimulate your ideas, who make you feel more alive. It is possible to have many such people with whom you are coupled in a way which doesn't restrict you, and whom I call a muse, M-U-S-E. That is to say, they inspire you in some way. And at the end of any conversation with you, I would feel that you have inspired me, you've developed some kind of thought in my head which has not been there before. So how does one apply this to the fact that we belong to different nations which despise each other or insult each other or whatever, and to different religions which keep itself apart? And since all the wars we have which cause us so much trouble are the result of nations and religions fighting, we've got to find some new solution for that. I don't ask you, what is your religion? But I say, how do you apply your religion in practice? What do you do? And then we can talk much more easily, independently of what your metaphysical beliefs may be. And likewise with nations. Nations were invented to produce consensus between a group of people who, in fact, are dissimilar and who have never met each other. The conclusion of the many years I spent trying to study France as a specimen, as a sort of guinea pig, to see what humans are like, I decided that there were as many minorities in France as there were inhabitants. And it's the same in England. Each one of you creates a nation for yourself. You have your own private nations. As I say, you have met people in different parts of the world with whom you sympathize, whom you understood. To be educated, you have to develop sympathies for other civilizations. You don't say, I love all Icelandic people, because you never met them, first of all, but each Icelandic person is different. But when you meet one Icelandic person, you then understand a bit of what it's like to live in Iceland, and you may say, well, I'll come along and I'll tell you the story of I once invited an Ayatollah from Iran, one very important Ayatollahs, and he spent an hour insulting us, telling us how the West were the devil, and he went on in a very violent way. And at the end of it, he embraced me, and he said, I want to come again. And I said, why? And he said, because you listened to me. And that is what people want. They want to be listened to. And none of our institutions allow us to be listened to. That is why, in politics, I think liberty, equality, and fraternity are not enough. It's all very well being allowed to say what you like in some countries. But if no one listens, what good is that? What you want is to be understood and appreciated. And our institutions don't allow that. It's no good saying we want equality because, first of all, we haven't achieved equality, and secondly, because we're all unequal in some ways, and all you poor people who are wearing glasses are unequal to those who don't wear glasses, and we can't hear properly, and we all have faults of different kinds. But what we want, what overcomes our inequality, is not equality of money, but affection. That is to say, you can be loved by somebody despite your faults. And that is what we need. And with fraternity, likewise, it's not enough to get a pension and to be treated as somebody who has a right to a pension. You want people to recognize you and to make you feel that you are somebody. In other words, you want to feel that you're alive. And everything that I'm talking about is how you can feel more alive. Are you more than 20% alive at the moment? Can you, without more experience, can you raise yourself to 25 to 30%, 50%? Because I don't think we'll ever be 100% alive. As I mentioned at the beginning, how you spend your time. And you spend your time at work, but work is not organized to please you. Work is organized for other purposes. And how can we now reinvent work so that it makes the satisfaction of your desire to be fully alive the first priority. And I have tried to do it in a number of industries already. What I would like is people to embark on these experiments, because we're not going to change the world straight away. But we can see if enough of us show it can be done this way, it can be done that way. I was invited by the managers, the CEO of IKEA, to talk to their managers. And then they invited me to Sweden to talk to other managers. And then they invited me to India to talk to other managers and their suppliers of cheap goods. Then they offered me a IKEA store in which to try out my idea that you could make a superstore into a cultural center. That is to say, when you go into IKEA, you don't speak to anybody. You will never know who made the objects you're buying with all this technology. Why can't you see that the lampshade you bought is made by a woman in New Delhi, whose factory I went to see? Why can't you learn something from her and vice versa? Why is this an anonymity? And why can't you get to know the salespeople who have all sorts of interesting things? Salespeople only because they can't get other jobs. And I remember how the salesman of office furniture had a master's degree in horticulture. Now that was an interesting man, but you never find out. You don't see what there is behind this facade. And in IKEA, we organized English lessons for immigrants. And they had never spoken to anybody, these immigrants. At last, they could come there as a kind of social club. And there was a fascinating woman who couldn't speak English very well, but her husband had been imprisoned and shot. When we got her conversing with an English person, he said, "I've never experienced anything like this." And at the end of it, they were sort of embracing each other and thanking each other for the chance to get out of their isolation. And we organized music lessons for the children, because children usually come to supermarkets and just don't know what to do with themselves. Why do our commercial activities have to be so isolated? Why does art have to be separated from work? And I think that separation is one of the great tragedies of history. And we can think of ways by which we could all not only bring art into work, but make our own lives into a work of art. And so the art of living, for me, is different from the usual solution which is offered to you, which is, say, calm down, don't be too excited, take a course in yoga or mindfulness. I think there are more exciting things to do, and I want myself to enjoy what is most unique about humans, which is our ability to think, and our ability to think in unexpected ways. To be human is to be a heretic of nature. Trees don't say, "I'm going to grow a new branch," but humans do. That's why you're sitting on chairs now and not living in treetops. How should we think about the fact that, in fact, we're going to die? Our new knowledge about what dying means. When you look at what goes on inside your body, your cells are dying all the time. And they're dying because when they cease to connect with other cells, and when they're isolated, they are pre-organized to just vanish. And I see that as a metaphor for what we are doing. We die when we no longer connect with others. We die intellectually. We cease to be fertile intellectually. I don't ask you, therefore, what your age is. I say, how have you lived? And if you're still alive, 20 or 50 or whatever %, your physical age is not what matters. Age is simply a disguise which conceals the fact of how much you have, what is inside you, and how active you are, how capable you are of interacting with others. And when you cease to do that, you reduce the extent to which you're alive. So this idea that you've got to be young, pretend that you're, try and be young and wear the same clothes as young people, this is all disguise. The whole idea of what old age is needs to be changed. I'm not telling you, as motivational speakers will tell you, you can have everything you want if you only fulfill the following 3 steps which will make you happy. and rich and famous and everything else that you want to be. First of all, because you don't know what you want. And even if you did know what you want, you might be mistaken. And there are other things you could know if only you knew about them, but you don't know, so you don't want them. So giving you what you want is not my purpose. Expanding your imagination is.